So today we're going to look at using Docker again. And like I said before, this presentation kind of came out of a necessity, a need for me to figure out how to export a WordPress site from a live production environment and actually install it onto my Mac M1 machine to actually do some local development tweaking before moving this site to another live hosting environment. And since traditional VMs did not work, I started looking at why the industry wasn't jumping the gun and getting on board with getting the new virtual machines on board with the ARM chip. And as I started researching this and digging into this, I started to discover that a lot of the development industry, a lot of our developers or even testers have actually kind of gotten away from the VM model a little bit and have gone more with Docker or more with container-based systems. This way, they can use things like ARM, Kubernetes, Docker to just quickly throw up a container and actually start working with an application without having to deal with the overhead of actually building the operating system. So that is what our discussion is going to be about today. We're going to look at how to set up Docker to host a WordPress site. We're going to export a live site from HostGator, that's a WordPress site, and run it inside of our Docker container. And if we have time, I will show you how to wrap up the containers so that you can export it to another site. First, quick review of Docker. Docker is essentially another tool like Kubernetes or AWS, where it's designed to make it easier to create, deploy, and run applications using containers. And like I briefly said, containers are not VMs. They're just a package containing all the parts of your application. This will include things like your libraries, third-party dependencies, images, basically all the files you need to actually run the application without the overhead of the operating system. And it also makes it easier for us to wrap up these containers and deploy them to any container-based environment. And again, containers are not VMs. And containers are not VMs because simply virtual machines, typically virtual machines are essentially full emulations of a full operating machine. So virtual machines will run any software that runs on a specific bare metal hardware, like the Intel chip, while providing isolation from the real hardware. So you kind of have this virtual, like a remote desktop into a machine, but it's a virtual machine. And a VM can also host multiple applications, which will mix and match over time versus a container that is typically built for a single application. So you're basically building your containers for one application, and virtual machines can run multiple. And one way to think about this is Microsoft has kind of gone with this approach with Office 365. So your container, or essentially your VM, in a Windows environment is Windows. Well, with their container approach, with their applications, with Office 365, for example, if you actually go out to Office 365 and open up Microsoft Word in that situation is essentially your Word container. You can open up multiple documents inside of this container, and in that kind of situation, your Word container can then essentially have small document containers inside of the Word container. And if you have this on a Windows machine, you can have Word open, you can have Excel open, so you can have multiple applications. Also, containers allow applications to run in a container environment. They share an underlying operating system. Well, VRM systems can have different operating systems. But it is possible to have a fixed set of applications in a single container using VM. All right, some of the other things we're going to talk about today. So what is WordPress and why do we care? Well, WordPress is one of the largest blogging platforms in use today. It's a good online, apologies. It's a good online open source website creation tool. This is what we use for our Developer Nerd site. I use it for my Doctor Who site, Malachi Consulting. Dave uses it for his Wama Consulting site, and pretty much any site on the web where people actually produce a lot of content is typically posted in some type of WordPress or CRM type environment. It's written in PHP and designed for use with open source technology such as Apache and MySQL, which is perfect because this makes it real easy for us to kind of wrap this all inside of a container. All right, so that's it for the quick overview and the slides. We're going to jump out now, and we're actually going to do a full hands-on demo today. And we're going to look at installing and setting up Docker. We're going to go over some of the Docker command line commands using Docker Compose, which is going to simplify a lot of our discussion today. If you want a more deeper dive into Docker, or if this is your first time seeing Docker, I recommend you go back into our video library and look at our previous presentations on what Docker is, how to set up Docker, and Kubernetes. And finally, we're going to package and deploy a live WordPress site, my Malachi Consulting site, from a live website to a local container running on my Any questions at this point? Is everyone clear on what we're going to be talking about today?
Yes, sir, we're good.
Awesome. All right, so just a quick little bit of housekeeping. So first, we're going to need to go to a couple different sites. If you don't have Docker installed, you need to go to docker.com and look for the Get Started link, usually in the upper right-hand corner. If you click this guy, you're going to be taken to their software site. The main thing you want to be concerned about is installing the Docker desktop. Now, if you are a Mac user, you need to be very specific on the version you select. If you have the new MacBook Pro M1 chip, do not install the Mac Intel chip. It will not work. In fact, it will actually make your life a pain because then you have to go find the libraries, delete them all, and then reinstall the correct one, which is the download for the Mac Apple chip, the M1 chip. Windows, just download Windows, and Linux is easy. It's just download the Linux. Docker Hub is not necessary for this presentation, but it is a nice place to go to kind of upload your cloud-based applications, test them live in the cloud, and there's some other different pricing options there. Again, if you want to learn more about this, go back and check out the Docker presentations that we've done previously. Next, you want to make sure that you have Docker Compose installed. It is, if you go to, basically, I just did a quick Google search for this. So if you Google Docker Compose, typically it's the first one you want. Look for Install Docker Compose. And then if you scroll down a little bit, it'll give you the tabs here for how to install Docker Compose on the different machines. It's a command line install typically, so I would use the directions for your specific operating system. Again, I've covered this previously in previous presentations, but if you have not watched them, these are the two mandatory components that you need to get started today. The other thing we're going to look at real quickly before I get into the Docker setup locally is we're going to look at my live website, MalachiConsulting.com. So this is my personal consulting business, Malachi Consulting. This is a WordPress site that I put together to market my business. And it's got some basic information, all built in PHP. On the back end, it is WordPress. So in order for us to easily export this live WordPress site, I recommend going to the plugins page and do a search for all-in-one. Search for the plugin. And what we want is we want this all-in-one WordPress migration. So you want to make sure that you find this plugin and install it on your site. And then when you go to their little how to or help pop up here, they'll walk you through, okay, install it, add it, and then go through the install activities. And then if you go out to their actual screenshots and reviews, it walks you through how to actually use the tool. It's actually real easy, really straightforward. So if you go to, once you install it, you go to the all-in-one WordPress migration, go to export, and then you just click add if you want to add specific content, or you can just do export to and tell it, hey, export my entire site. So if you don't add anything, it will export everything. And you can say file, FTP, Dropbox. Depending upon the server you are hosting WordPress on, the file option may not be viable because you may not have enough disk space on your hosting provider to actually export the site to it. So you might want to look at some other options, like maybe up to Dropbox or one of these other private. If you do have a large production box, by all means do file. Otherwise, you might just want to install FTPzilla and or FileZilla and use that to host a FTP server locally and just export your files from your site to your local machine. For now, I'll just select File. It's going to go through, it's going to analyze the site, tell you where you might have some problems for exporting, and then you just kind of go through and check the boxes and continue till you get down to export the file. So I'm not going to walk through that because this will take a little bit of time. If you want to, again, see all the different pieces or walk through the components, you can just go to their plugins. And if we look at view details, screenshots, so you start by exporting your site. You can then filter out, do not export spam content. So you can remove media that you don't want. Import, same kind of thing. You just take the file and stick it in. So once you do export, you select file, and then it just basically goes through and you have a couple additional screens. Once the file's created, you then download it to your environment, your local machine, or to your new production environment. So that's how quick and easy it is to export your WordPress site. There are more complex, more advanced ways to do it, but for a typical simple migration like this tool is perfect. It's free and it will do 99% of what you need. So once you are done, it generates the file, you download your file, and then you move over to your local environment. Okay. And I will just start with Docker Desktop. So if we go to Docker Desktop, so if you've gone through the Docker site, installed your local Docker environment, Docker Desktop, it will ask you to log in. It's free. Go ahead and create your account, sign in. It's actually neat because even with the free plan, you have the capabilities of uploading to the Docker Hub, and you can test out your containers live in the cloud. There's some additional settings you can do here if you want, but we're not going to get into those today. Again, more details on the Docker container and Docker. Go check out our previous presentation. All right, so I've started out clean. I've removed all of my local Docker containers for now for this presentation. So right now my containers and apps are empty. My images are empty. I have no Docker images currently loaded, and I have no virtual drives or volumes for my Docker containers. So what we need to do is we need to go out to our command line, and actually before we do this, so the first thing we actually want to make sure is we want to make sure that we have Docker Compose installed. So for that, we will type Docker Compose -c, and it tells me, yes, I have Docker Compose version 129.2 installed. And so once we have Docker Compose installed, we actually need to build a Docker Compose file. So I will go out to my development environment. Oh, I'm already there. I am in my users, development. I create a specific workspace for my Docker environments, and I've created a WordPress folder. So inside of this folder, clean that guy up quick. So even though I cleared out my volumes, my test code was still there. And I'll explain what all those files are in just a second.